Richard Cotty, Managing Director of Central Petroleum.
Rob Schulte, Area Operations Manager for Central Petroleum.
David Littleland, Access Manager, Central Petroleum.
Thank you very much. Yes, you have 20 minutes with an additional 10 minutes reserved for questions and answers from the panel. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much for inviting me to make a submission. Obviously, during the course of your inquiry, you will be hearing a lot of scientific evidence, and there has been more scientific inquiries into fracking than there has been of any other aspect of the industry across the world. Suffice it to say that fracking first occurred in the industry in 1948 and has been about 60% of the world's natural gas comes from some degree of fracking reservoirs. Obviously, the present climate has somewhat changed since the success of particularly shale gas and CSG, which has elevated the profile of what is a normal operating process for the natural gas industry. Suffice it to say, there is very little evidence of any permanent damage done as a result of fracking other than on surface facilities, and they occur primarily through pond leakage and that sort of stuff. Clearly, you will hear during the course of inquiry that presently most fracking fluids, and particularly the ones allowed in the Northern Territory, are generally biodegradable and primarily made up of water, bore water, which is about 90% of it, 99% of it, and the rest is things like guava, which is used in guava gum, which is used in ice cream, as well as various other matter constituents that are used in the average kitchen in some shape or form. Essentially, the thing called proppant is a sand or a bead that enables the crack that has been opened by the water injection to remain open. Suffice it to say, we at Central Petroleum operate Mereenie, Palm Valley and Bingo fields, and have operated Palm Valley and Mereenie since the 1980s. It was first discovered in the 1960s and 70s and has been a major supplier of natural gas to the Northern Territory up until 2009, when offshore gas became the prime source of gas for the Northern Territory. It's sometimes quite interesting to reflect how come something that used to be considered to be non-contentious is suddenly contentious, and it appears to me that there are three prime causes. The first is that natural gas has been tried to be portrayed as a competitor to renewable energies, and the second is whenever you are making a change to the socio-economic order in the areas in which you operate, one can always see some degree of resistance to that change as it first gets introduced. So obviously the introduction of a new industry by itself will cause some degree of social dislocation. The third, I believe, is because of the advent more recently of FIFO as a result of the resources boom and the lack of manpower, people power, I guess I should say, available for the resources sector within the local communities. If I may deal with the first of those three, which is the competition with renewable energies. Whilst there is some area by which natural gas has been considered to be a transition fuel because of its ability to provide peak electricity when the wind don't blow and the sun don't shine. At the end of the day, the prime use of natural gas in Australia is not for electricity generation. Taking the largest states, New South Wales statistics, 50% of natural gas is used in a manufacturing process. There's 300 manufacturers employing 300,000 people, for which electricity is no substitute to natural gas. It is either because of the high temperatures required, for example, infectious waste from hospitals, or the evenness of the temperature, for example, in glass manufacturing or brick making. So it's primarily matters by which you cannot substitute electricity for it. If New South Wales has 300,000 direct jobs employed because of natural gas being available, you can see the extrapolation across the other states could well lead to nearly a tenth of the workforce is dependent upon natural gas being available as a reliable supply. Hence the ACCC inquiry and the Vertican reports to try and create greater flexibility in the natural gas supply. Taking the second one, I have been privileged enough to have been involved in the natural gas industry since 1982, not continuously, but I can state that I have created over 10,000 full-time equivalent jobs in my working life, a matter of which I'm quite proud. It did appear to me when I was a pioneer in CSG in Queensland, in QGC, that there was an enormous issue in upsetting the socio-economic order, particularly in the fact that we went into the highest unemployed region in Queensland at the time, and it was the equivalent of the western districts of Victoria, the southern highlands, that had created more premiers of Queensland than any other district. So it was always difficult when you moved it from the highest to the lowest, so that when the local farmers, etc., could no longer get the harvesters at cheap prices and was therefore competing for labour, was always going to create some degree of issues. We at QGC, however, went a large degree before it was taken over by BG in 2008, when I ceased to be relevant to QGC. We used to do such things as drama in the gas field. That was a cheeky way of presenting it, if you like, but we commissioned a playwright to write a play based on the Darling Downs, brought a professional theatre company from Whiteout and actually performed that play within our gas field so that people would see that it was a working agricultural property as they drove into it, and to ensure that people came. With a couple of things we did was face painting and free child minding, but importantly what we did was cause the catering to be done by all of the local clubs, whether it was the netball club or the rugby club or the AFL club or whatever else. They were all given a franchise and were promised that if they didn't sell all of their produce, the company would buy their produce at retail prices. That ensured that every person, every mother or father was eventually rostered on for the major fundraising event. And if Dad didn't want to turn up to the netball club on the barbecue on his roster, he had to face Jenny and her blinking eyes. And inevitably, the same happened with the sons, with the mothers. They did turn up. The net result was that Chinchilla and Miles had 7,000 and 3,000 people total population. In the last year we ran it, 11,000 people turned up. So you can well imagine the import of that. The last one was FIFO. We took over Mereenie in September of 2015, less than 18 months ago. At that stage, 93% of its workforce was FIFO and only 7% was local. And you can see that we weren't obviously contributing a lot to the social fabric of Alice Springs at that point in time. Before we took it over, when we took over Palm Valley and Dingo, we put in 3 employment philosophies rather than policies. and the first was captured under the title Northern Territory for Northern Territorians, and we were trying to ensure that the maximum amount of our workforce did come from the Northern Territory, and in particular the local community. The second one was what we call working family values for working families, to the extent that Dingo was only 50 k's from Alice Springs. We've used modern technology to actually centre it at Burroughs Estate, just near Alice Springs Airport, near the jail there, and so that our workforce could be based in Alice Springs and turn up by driving at the beginning of their shifts and returning home at night to be with their families, on the assumption that some of our workforce will commit economic suicide by having children. We assumed that the financial detriment of having a family was more outweighed by the joy of being able to participate in bringing those children up through life and watching them perform at speech night or at netball or whatever their sporting activity, and that in itself would enable us to be able to be part of that community, because it struck me as a father of 6 children that if I look at my non-working friends, they are all the parents of one of my children's friends that I happen to be running up and down the side of a playing field or a debating or whatever else it happened to be as you enjoyed the progress of your own children into adulthood. And that meant that the company would be seen to be much more local as a result. The last one we had was traditional values for traditional owners. The net result was within 12 months, literally a bit over 10 months, we transformed that to having a majority of our workforce from the local community. Half of that was traditional owners. As I speak today, roughly 1/3 of our workforce is local Indigenous, 1/3 is local non-Indigenous, and 1/3 are what you would classically call FIFO. It does appear to me there is a limit to which you can go totally local because of some of the specialised jobs that are required to be done, and that requires much more of a FIFO mentality as that where it is labour shortage. That has meant that we've had to go on a large training program today. Next to me on my left is Rolf. He has relocated with his wife to Alice Springs. He lives in Kilgarriff Estate, and David Little, his father, was with our company for many a long year, Bob, and was a local mayor in the 80s in the Alice Springs Council, as I recall, and one of the first to do so. So he is one of the local traditional families that work in our area, and therefore he is often a public face on media or other events as part of it. And it seemed appropriate to me that I should be represented here, with 1/3 being FIFO myself, 1/3 being local non-Indigenous, and 1/3 being local Indigenous, to represent a good cross-section of our workforce. It is important to realise that we have been producing since 1982. Presently, we do not import water at all. It is all local produced water that we use so water doesn't wear out. We are not using water in any shape or form from external sources. We are clearly to the last frac well I think we did there was in 1990s or early 2000. we fully understand now the fractures of the rock, and so have not been having to consider to increase it. We have drilled over 60 wells, presently only 35 are operating due to lack of demand, but we anticipate when the Northern Gas Pipeline is commissioned and operating and helps and supplies gas for the domestic market and helps provide the economic anarchy that is clearly going to be created by the lack of energy security and lack of gas, then we will bring on some of those wells that are presently not producing. But we still cannot envisage a situation that we would be using any water external to that which we have presently on site that have been produced. We are producing it at an horizon kilometres below the ground. It is well and truly beyond the economic ability to use that water for agricultural purposes. It's hard rock and it's deep, and therefore it would not be economic to use it for agricultural or other purposes. I think that in a large extent, Australians need to realise that we are increasingly living in Sydney, Melbourne, possibly Brisbane and Perth, and we are a country the size of continental USA. There is a large degree of economic dislocation occurring in the regional areas. The traditional regional employers primarily agriculture and the resources sector. That provides the employment for those regions, and tourism is a late starter within that same parameters. Having grown up in a country town myself, the hardest part of it is what I would call the donutting of the local community. If you bring up children in a local community that's in remote Australia, it is a wonderful place to bring children up until the age of 14 or 15, but you realise that by the time of 18, no matter how good a parent you may be, your children will leave for employment reasons. Oils ain't oils, if I may just use that old saying. CSG produces a lot of water because dewatering is very much part of the process. If you take the water out, then the gas has got a pathway to escape. So clearly it has got a different water profile than one that doesn't require dewatering. Given that it is economic suicide for the frac to go outside the producing zone, you're trying to create the path of least resistance for the gas to escape, being the hole that you've created. The best water you can use is water that is chemically exactly the same as the zone from which you're producing. So there is an enormous preference to ensure that the water that you use for fracking actually comes from the producing zones if you can. And obviously there's some degree of evaporation that will occur, and there is an initial use, possibly, depending on the locale, initial use for about a swimming pool size amount of water per well being required, and that. But once you are producing, then that water, 80% of it comes back to the surface with production. So it's not like each well needs a swimming pool size. It's you start off with a swimming pool, and then you need 20% of a swimming pool for the next well. So and it is not only is it sensible to use from an economic point of view, it's chemically a preferable way to go about it. Well, because we have already completed our fracs, as I say, in those wells, 35 of them have been fracked nearly 2 decades ago. Therefore, we are no longer importing any water, and we're actually evaporating water from our wells rather than useful. If we did require ourselves to do any more, but we're not shale gas, we're conventional, if we did, we would have our own water and not be bringing it in. So it's very important to make a distinction between CSG in particular, which is one, shallower, and two, requires dewatering as part of the production. And anyone who's been involved in coal mining knows that you used to send canaries and Welsh boys down coal mines because of either the methane or the water. The drowning, for example, at Gretley coal mine in Newcastle in the 90s is a classic example of a lot of water being in that coal. Equally, it's important to realise that QGC actually pegged that acreage because of naturally occurring methane outbursts, and secondly, what I'd call induced, which was where farmers stupidly tried to harvest the water from the coal seams, and dewatering occurred, and gas was released into water wells that had no safety requirements. So it's not like that coal seam gas water can actually be used for agriculture, because it's nature. It's a natural phenomenon that when you dewater, gas will be released, and I can explain that later if you like. But having known it, but I don't know whether the inquiry needs to go into that.
I think Dr. Anderson has a question.
Yeah, Alan Anderson, thanks, Mr. Cotty. So you talked a lot about the experiences and achievements of your company, but I'm wondering if you took a bit of a step back and looked at the broader issue of development of the industry in the NT, and from your experiences, what would you see as the major environmental risks?
I would see the major risks is actually making sure that the well sites were properly fenced to prevent any degree of tampering with the equipment. I think clearly the next, because that can be done by either animals or human, and you should always try and prevent that. The second will obviously be tailings dams or issues like that, which is happens in most resources sectors. And the third would be the proper bunding and control of any chemicals or other matter that is brought in and introduced, so that if there happens to be any degree of spillage or anything else, that goes straight into bunding. But that would be the same sort of bunding that you'd have around crude oil tanks, etc., etc. I think that provided you ensured that the chemicals in fracking were biodegradable, given the depth at which they operate, I can't see how they wouldn't be fully biodegraded by the time they migrated anyway. If they did, clearly you would need to make sure the appropriate regulations on the drills, that you have proper cement casings and various other things. But it's fairly rare for anything to occur on the casings. It's generally speaking, most of it is on the surface, in my experience. And in CSG, and you don't have CSG, obviously water disposal becomes a major issue.
I'll take two more questions. Yes, Dr. Priestley and then Ms. Gorman.
You mentioned briefly the range of chemicals that are used in the fracking process. I wonder if you'd be able to expand a little bit on the processes for transport and on-site storage and compounding of these chemicals, and whether these processes differ very much across different sites.
Do you want to handle that, Rob?
Well, most of the chemicals that are transported in by the company that does the fracking, they come in on trucks. It usually comes in on road trains. It's only brought in, they work out what they require and they only bring in what is required. They don't usually store on site. It comes in a day or two before the fracking is about to happen. The chemicals are used and then the trucks are left site. So we don't store chemicals for fracking on site. They're just brought in when required.
And the major issue then is that when you start producing, 80, as I said, 80% of the water comes back, and also 80% of anything you introduce comes back. So you ensure that you have proper lining and mud bunding, etc., for that until it becomes benign through biodegradability.
Yes, Ms. Gorham.
Richard, a couple of things. You referred a couple of times to using biodegradable fracking chemicals. That's one of the concerns, I guess, for many people, that the chemicals last in the environment. Would you be prepared to make the list of fracking chemicals that you use available to the committee?
Oh, well, look, to the extent we're allowed to, a large problem here is because of it's a proprietary substance owned by someone else. My own view is that there should be some degree of registration, as there are with medicals, as to is the Schlumberger. They need to protect their patents, is what they argue, and so they don't want to tell you totally how and what component, like a Coca-Cola patent is. But we've been able to overcome that sort of thing in the medical industry by registration, and you don't actually ever find out precisely what it is, but there is a government body that says, yes, thalidomide is no longer allowed to be used, and there's a whole host of trials before you're allowed to release medicines on the unsuspecting public. And I can't see any reason why we can't invent the same sort of regime without infringing on the intellectual property of the people who've created it. So it's not, we don't know precisely what it is. We do get representations and warranties as to biodegradability or various other things that can be made, but they're not going to give us, just because I drink Coke or used to, I'm too old now, it makes me too fat. It doesn't mean I ever knew what actually went in it. And so that's the prime issue, is how do you preserve intellectual property whilst ensuring the public that there's been a proper scrutiny as to its impact, and it's only registered chemicals or fracking fluids that can be used or something like that. Would make a lot of sense to me.
In the course of our consultations, there's been, we've heard about a leak at Marini, and I was just wondering if you could tell us any more about that, what the extent of the leak was, how that was dealt with.
I'm unaware in our history of a gas leak at Marini. We've gone through our records. I can't add anything to that because we have no knowledge. So if someone has knowledge that no one at our worksite is knowing about, that I need more particulars. We don't believe there is one.
Can I just follow that up? Because I think you mentioned you took over Marini a couple of years ago. Is that right?
Correct, but when we took over it, we took it over from Santos, and it's been going for years.
Yes.
There's an enormous amount of records and filings being made, and there's no public or company records. We own all the company records.
Yes.
As a transfer of ownership and operatorship, we were given all of the records. And suffice it to say, we've got some employees, one's called Pom, who's been there since for 32 years. And so there's both human records. Has there been any gas leak in your 32 years here? No. And company records and filings.
I'm not actually sure if it was a gas leak or a chemical spillage, but it's fairly tenuous. So if you don't know anything about it, then we remain unaware.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not discounting the fact that there could have been a diesel leak or something like that at site at some point in time. But I went through the company records to gas leaks, not whether cooking or that bit spilt. Might be, and I'm not being flippant. I'm just saying there's a limit to your inquiry, and that's all I can say.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cotty. Thank you for coming today.